The Zoraxian Central Diplomatic Spire rose like a crystalline nightmare against the planet's perpetual twilight. Its architecture defied conventional physics, a massive structure that seemed to shimmer between solid matter and pure energy, constructed from materials that most galactic civilizations could only dream of understanding. Today, it hosted the 743rd Galactic Confederation Peace Summit, an event so meticulously planned that every millisecond had been calculated, every potential diplomatic interaction mapped with quantum-level precision. Chief Diplomat Kral of the Velox Concordance adjusted his neural link diplomatic insignia, the countless tendrils of bioorganic circuitry pulsing with carefully modulated emotions. Around him, the most powerful representatives in the known galaxy assembled, each a walking testament to their civilization's technological and cultural supremacy. The Keltheri delegation floated in their gravitational bubbles, their translucent bodies shifting colors with each micro-expression. The Rancor representatives stood like living crystal sculptures, their crystalline forms refracting light in impossible geometric patterns. No one expected anything to disturb this carefully orchestrated ballet of galactic diplomacy. No one, except perhaps the humans. The first indication that something was amiss came not with a sound, but with a subtle change in the room's quantum harmonics. The delicate energy fields that surrounded the diplomatic chamber, fields designed to detect and neutralize any potential threat, began to ripple. It was less an interruption and more a gentle suggestion that the laws of physics might be more flexible than previously thought. Then came the ship. It wasn't large. In fact, compared to the massive diplomatic vessels of other civilizations, it was almost comically small. A sleek, somewhat battered craft that looked like it had been cobbled together from salvaged parts, yet moved with a precision that suggested something far more sophisticated was happening beneath its unassuming exterior. The ship didn't so much approach as it did negotiate with space itself. Standard approach protocols meant nothing to this vessel. It didn't follow standard communication channels. It didn't broadcast identification codes. Instead, it performed a maneuver that would be discussed by xenophysicists for generations. It literally carved a path through the diplomatic spire's supposedly impenetrable force fields. The force fields didn't break. They didn't shatter or collapse. They parted. Like water around a perfectly designed blade, they simply moved aside, allowing the human vessel to pass through with a precision that suggested negotiation rather than violation. The ship slid into the central chamber of the diplomatic spire, leaving behind a trail of perfectly geometric scoring marks, each line so mathematically precise that it looked like it had been drawn by a god with a cosmic ruler. It came to a stop with the delicate grace of an Olympic curler, its momentum controlled down to the microscopic level. Absolute silence filled the chamber. Diplomat Kroll's neural links went haywire, struggling to process what had just occurred. The quantum-entangled communication networks that connected the various delegations buzzed with confusion. Every single advanced scanning system in the room was experiencing what could only be described as a collective nervous breakdown. The ship's exterior was unlike anything in the known galactic catalogs. Its surface seemed to be covered in energy signatures that shouldn't exist, patterns that hinted at technologies so advanced they bordered on the metaphysical. Exotic particle interactions danced across its hull, creating temporary quantum state fluctuations that would make any serious physicist weep with joy and confusion. Then the hatch opened. Captain Elena Rodriguez emerged, and the word emerge didn't do justice to her entrance. She walked out as if she were stepping into her own living room, not the most secure diplomatic chamber in the known galaxy. Her attire was incongruous. A charcoal business suit that looked like it had been tailored by someone who understood fabric the way a quantum physicist understands probability. Behind her came a team that looked less like a diplomatic delegation and more like a group of eccentric professors who had accidentally wandered into the wrong conference. Dr. Marcus Chen, the team's xenolinguist, adjusted his glasses, a completely analog piece of technology in a room full of bioorganic neural interfaces. To his left, Dr. Aisha Nakamura carried what appeared to be a standard tablet, but anyone with advanced scanning capabilities could see it was processing information at levels that made the room's most advanced systems look like children's toys. Not a single member of the human team looked perturbed. Not a single one showed even a hint of the magnitude of what they had just accomplished. They had just crashed the most important diplomatic summit in galactic history, and they looked like they were about to discuss lunch plans. The first to break the silence was not an alien diplomat, but Dr. Marcus Chen. He cleared his throat, a disarmingly human gesture that seemed absurdly out of place in the quantum-entangled diplomatic chamber. "I apologize for our somewhat unconventional entrance," he said, his voice carrying with impossible clarity to every corner of the room. More impossibly, every single being present understood him perfectly, despite speaking in their native linguistic patterns. Chief Diplomat Curl's neural links began to spark and dance erratically. Translation wasn't happening through technology. Something far more fundamental was occurring. The human was speaking, and yet each delegate heard the words in their own language, with all the nuanced cultural implications intact. It was as if language itself had become a living, breathing entity that bent itself to their understanding. Captain Elena Rodriguez stepped forward, her movements deliberate and calculated. Where other diplomatic teams would have launched into formal protocols or defensive explanations, she simply raised an eyebrow, a gesture so subtle yet so laden with meaning that it felt like a novel's worth of communication compressed into a single muscular twitch. "We're here to help," she said. The statement was so simple, so direct, that it momentarily short-circuited the complex emotional regulation systems of the Kelthari delegates. Their translucent bodies flickered through an impossible spectrum of colors, revealing emotional states that most civilizations spent centuries learning to conceal. Dr. Aisha Nakamura began to activate her tablet. If activate was even the right word. The device seemed to emerge from potential states of existence, its interface dancing with holographic projections that made the most advanced alien technologies look like children's drawing tablets. "We've discovered something," she said, her tone academic and matter-of-fact, as if she were discussing the results of a minor research experiment rather than potentially upending galactic geopolitics. The holographic display that erupted from her tablet was nothing short of a cognitive assault. Intricate networks of connections began to materialize. Diplomatic relations, technological exchanges, resource allocations, but viewed through a lens that no civilization had ever conceived. It wasn't just data. It was a living, breathing map of galactic interactions that revealed patterns of manipulation so subtle that they had gone unnoticed for millennia. The Rancor crystal beings began to vibrate at frequencies that suggested pure intellectual distress. Their crystalline structures, normally perfect and unchanging, showed microscopic fractures, the physical manifestation of a worldview being fundamentally challenged. "For the past 3 centuries, Dr. Chen continued, your civilizations have been operating under a series of collaborative and competitive assumptions that are fundamentally incorrect." He said this not with accusation, but with the gentle tone of a professor guiding students to an important revelation. Each projection showed layers of interaction, economic, technological, cultural, that revealed how external forces had been subtly nudging different civilizations into perpetual low-intensity conflicts. It wasn't outright warfare, but a carefully maintained state of perpetual tension that prevented any single civilization from achieving true galactic prominence. The humans had essentially performed an intellectual vivisection of galactic politics in less than 10 minutes. Captain Rodriguez walked closer to the central diplomatic platform, her movements suggesting she owned the space despite being an uninvited guest. "We're not here to judge," she said. "We're here to help you see what's been hiding in plain sight." Dr. Nakamura's tablet continued its display, now showing predictive models that mapped potential cooperative scenarios. These weren't just theoretical projections. They were mathematically precise roadmaps that showed how seemingly incompatible civilizations could not just coexist, but genuinely thrive together. The most terrifying aspect for the assembled delegates was not the revelations themselves, but how casually the humans were presenting them. This wasn't a dramatic unveiling. This was a group of researchers sharing what they considered to be an interesting afternoon's work. Chief Diplomat Kroll's neural links finally stabilized, but the damage was done. The perfectly planned diplomatic summit had been completely rewritten in the span of moments, and the humans hadn't fired a single weapon. They hadn't raised their voices. They had simply explained. Dr. Chen adjusted his glasses, a completely analog gesture in a room of quantum-linked beings. "Any questions?" he asked, as if they were discussing nothing more consequential than the weather. The galactic delegates stared, their sophisticated communication systems temporarily reduced to a state of pure, unadulterated shock. Humanity had arrived, and they were here to help, whether anyone wanted help or not. The diplomatic chamber remained suspended in a state of collective disbelief as Dr. Elena Ramirez, the human team's chief technological strategist, stepped forward. Unlike her colleagues, she carried what appeared to be nothing more than a simple metallic briefcase, a piece of technology so mundane that it seemed almost insulting in the context of the advanced galactic gathering. "I believe we can help resolve some of your most persistent technological challenges," she announced, her voice carrying a tone that was equal parts academic precision and barely contained excitement. The Krelnaxian Energy Minister, Svartol, couldn't help but scoff. His species had been struggling with energy distribution challenges for over 7 centuries. Entire civilizations had risen and fallen while trying to solve the fundamental limitations of their power grid. The idea that a human, a species barely a century into interstellar travel, could offer a solution was laughable. Dr. Ramirez opened the briefcase. What emerged was not a piece of technology in any traditional sense. It was more like a living blueprint, a holographic projection that seemed to breathe and pulse with its own form of intelligence. Quantum entanglement diagrams, energy flow models, and computational matrices danced around her, forming intricate three-dimensional representations that made the Krelnaxians' most advanced scanning systems look like children's drawing toys. "Your current energy distribution model," she began, is fundamentally constrained by a misconception about quantum coherence at macro-scale energy transfers. The words were spoken not as a criticism, but as a matter-of-fact observation. With a gesture that was part scientific precision and part artistic flourish, she began to deconstruct the Krelnaxian energy grid in real time. Each limitation was not just identified, but reimagined. Where their current system saw barriers, she revealed pathways. Where they saw impossible constraints, she demonstrated flexible solutions. The holographic display began to show alternative energy distribution models that didn't just improve efficiency. They fundamentally reimagined the entire concept of energy transmission. Svartol's neural interfaces began to overheat. The human wasn't just offering a solution. She was revealing an entirely new way of conceptualizing energy itself. Simultaneously, Dr. Chen was engaging with the Viren Communication Network representatives. Their current interstellar communication systems relied on massive quantum relay stations that were expensive, fragile, and limited in range. Dr. Chen's approach was something else entirely. "You're treating information like a physical commodity," he explained, his hands dancing through holographic communication protocol models. "Instead, consider information as a dynamic, adaptive ecosystem." The Viren delegates watched in growing astonishment as Chen demonstrated a communication model that was less about transmission and more about ecological information exchange. Their centuries-old communication infrastructure was being rewritten in real time, with the casual ease of someone reorganizing a bookshelf. Dr. Aisha Nakamura turned her attention to the Selnarian agricultural representatives. Their civilization had been struggling with ecosystem management on multiple colonized planets. Where previous approaches had been mechanical and rigid, Nakamura's solution was almost organic in its complexity. "Biodiversity isn't something you manage," she explained, her tablet generating incredibly detailed ecological simulations. "It's a conversation you participate in." Her proposed agricultural models weren't just more efficient. They represented a fundamental shift from resource extraction to ecological collaboration. Entire planetary ecosystems could be supported with a fraction of the current resource investment, while simultaneously increasing biodiversity and planetary health. Captain Rodriguez watched her team work, a slight smile playing on her lips. They weren't just offering solutions. They were revealing an entirely different way of perceiving technological and ecological challenges. The most terrifying aspect for the assembled delegates wasn't the solutions themselves. It was how casually they were being presented. These weren't grand presentations or dramatic reveals. These were researchers sharing what they considered to be relatively straightforward problem-solving approaches. Dr. Ramirez concluded her energy grid presentation by looking directly at Sivar Toll. This solution reduces your current energy production costs by approximately 83.7%, while simultaneously increasing grid stability and reducing environmental impact, she said, as if she were discussing something as mundane as adjusting a thermostat. The Krelnakshian energy minister's neural interfaces were now smoking slightly, a physical manifestation of a worldview being fundamentally challenged. Humanity hadn't just arrived at the galactic stage. They had walked in, rearranged the furniture, and were now looking around to see what else needed fixing, all before lunch. Dr. Aisha Nakamura stepped forward, her tablet now projecting a holographic representation that was less a technological display and more a living, breathing map of collective consciousness. The assembled delegates watched in growing unease as intricate networks of cultural interactions, historical conflicts, and psychological patterns began to materialize around them. Conflict, she began, her voice carrying the calm of a seasoned therapist, is rarely about the surface-level disagreements you believe define your relationships. The hologram shifted, revealing layers of interactions that peeled back like the most complex geological strata. Historical conflicts that had seemed immutable suddenly appeared as carefully orchestrated manipulations, with threads of connection that no civilization had ever noticed before. The Rancor crystal beings began to vibrate at frequencies that suggested pure intellectual distress. Their crystalline structures, normally perfect and unchanging, showed microscopic fractures, the physical manifestation of a worldview being fundamentally challenged. Captain Elena Rodriguez stood to the side, observing her team's work with a studied casualness that was itself a form of psychological manipulation. She understood that the most profound changes happen not through force, but through perspective. Dr. Marcus Chen approached the Keltheri delegation, whose translucent bodies continued to shift through impossible color spectrums, a biological tell of their emotional turbulence. Your conflict with the Viren Concordance, he said, pulling up a holographic timeline, isn't actually about resource allocation. It's about a fundamental misunderstanding of cultural communication patterns. The hologram began to demonstrate a linguistic analysis so deep that it bordered on cultural archaeology. Chen wasn't just showing data. He was revealing the invisible threads of misunderstanding that had sustained a centuries-long tension. A Keltheri diplomat, whose body was now flickering between shades of defensive crimson and contemplative blue, found himself unable to interrupt. The human was speaking a truth that cut deeper than any weapon could. Dr. Nakamura's display shifted, showing how seemingly random cultural interactions have been subtly guided by external manipulative forces. It was like watching a cosmic puppet show, where the strings of conflict had been pulled by entities none of the civilizations had ever recognized. "You've been playing a game," she explained, "without understanding the rules, the board, or even who the true players are." The psychological assault was precise and devastating. Unlike traditional diplomatic approaches that sought to smooth over differences, the humans were performing a form of collective cultural surgery, exposing the hidden infections of misunderstanding and manipulation. Captain Rodriguez understood the power of narrative. Each revelation was carefully measured, each piece of information designed to challenge without completely destroying the delegate's sense of self. This wasn't about humiliation. This was about awakening. Dr. Chen began to demonstrate how linguistic patterns had been systematically misinterpreted across civilizations. A word that meant cooperation in one culture had been consistently translated as submission in another, a mistranslation that had fueled centuries of conflict. The Viren communication experts found themselves simultaneously horrified and fascinated. Their entire understanding of interspecies communication was being dismantled with surgical precision. Conflict is a choice, Dr. Nakamura continued, her voice carrying the weight of generations of human psychological research. But it's a choice made in darkness, without full understanding of the context. The holographic display began to show potential collaborative scenarios, not as theoretical models, but as living, breathing possibilities. Civilizations that had been enemies for centuries suddenly appeared as potential symbiotic partners. The most terrifying aspect was the complete lack of judgment in the human presentation. They weren't condemning. They were explaining. They weren't attacking. They were revealing. Chief Diplomat Kral, whose neural links had been struggling to process the information, found himself experiencing something unprecedented, a complete recalibration of understanding. Captain Rodriguez watched her team work, understanding that they were doing something far more profound than diplomatic negotiation. They were teaching. They were revealing. They were showing these advanced civilizations how to truly see each other. "We're not here to solve your problems," she said quietly, almost as an aside. "We're here to help you understand that the problems themselves are an illusion." The diplomatic chamber had transformed from a site of potential conflict to a classroom of cosmic proportions, and the humans were the unexpected teachers, showing these advanced civilizations that true understanding was the most powerful technology of all. Humanity hadn't just entered the galactic stage. They had rewritten the entire script, and they were just getting started. The moment of tension arrived with surgical precision. A coalition of the most powerful alien civilizations, the Velox Concordance, the Rancor Crystalline Collective, and the Kelthari Flux Consortium, launched their counterattack. It wasn't a physical assault. It was a multi-layered diplomatic and technological strike designed to discredit and remove the human delegation. Their approach was a masterpiece of galactic political maneuvering. Quantum encrypted communication channels began to flood with carefully crafted misinformation. Technological sabotage algorithms were deployed, targeting the humans' communication systems. Neural link attacks attempted to disrupt the team's cognitive processes. Captain Elena Rodriguez didn't even blink. Dr. Marcus Chen, the team's communication expert, was already 3 steps ahead. As the first wave of quantum encrypted attacks began, his fingers danced across a device that looked like nothing more than an antiquated tablet. To the alien delegates, it seemed absurdly primitive. What they didn't realize was that Chen had already mapped every single communication channel, every potential point of interference, before they had even entered the diplomatic chamber. The misinformation algorithms hit their first firewall and simply dissolved. Zelnarian communication specialists watched in growing horror as their most sophisticated digital warfare techniques were not just blocked, but completely neutralized. More terrifyingly, the information was being traced back to its source with such precision that it felt like the humans were reading the very intention behind each attack. Dr. Elena Ramirez began her counteroffensive. Where the alien civilizations expected a defensive response, she launched an information campaign that was less an attack and more a surgical deconstruction of their entire communication strategy. Each piece of misinformation was not just blocked, it was systematically analyzed, its origins exposed, its creators laid bare. The neural link attacks encountered something entirely unexpected. Instead of being blocked or absorbed, they were reflected back with additional context. Each attacking civilization suddenly found itself confronting the psychological motivations behind its own aggression. The Rancor Crystalline Collective's communication matrices began to fracture. Their perfectly structured quantum communication networks, which had been the pinnacle of galactic information technology, suddenly appeared to be nothing more than an elaborate house of cards. Captain Rodriguez approached the central diplomatic platform, her movements deliberate and calm. "Interesting approach," she said, her voice carrying to every corner of the chamber without raising in volume. "Would you like to discuss why you felt this was necessary?" It was not a challenge. It was not a threat. It was an invitation to understanding that felt more devastating than any potential weapon. Dr. Aisha Nakamura's tablet began to generate holographic representations of the attack vectors. But these weren't just defensive displays. They were educational demonstrations, revealing the exact psychological and technological mechanisms behind each attempted interference. The most terrifying aspect was the complete lack of aggression in the human response. They weren't retaliating. They were explaining. They were teaching. Chief Diplomat Kral of the Velox Concordance found his neural links completely compromised. Not by force, but by a level of understanding that made their previous communication strategies appear like children's attempts at conversation. The attack had been designed to humiliate the humans, to expose them as technological novices. Instead, it had done the exact opposite. Each civilization found itself suddenly exposed, not through violent revelation, but through a compassionate deconstruction of their own motivations. The humans were performing a form of collective psychological surgery, and they were doing it with the casual ease of a routine medical procedure. Dr. Chen looked up from his tablet, adjusted his glasses, and spoke with the tone of a patient teacher. "Would you like to understand why your approach was fundamentally flawed?" The diplomatic chamber had transformed from a site of potential conflict into something else entirely, a classroom of cosmic proportions, with humanity as the unexpected educators. The alien civilizations had launched their most sophisticated attack, expecting to neutralize the human threat. Instead, they had provided the humans with the most comprehensive demonstration of their own limitations. Humanity hadn't just defended itself. It had turned an attack into an opportunity for understanding. And they were just getting started. Dr. Aisha Nakamura understood that true communication was less about words and more about the spaces between them. As she stepped forward, her tablet began to generate a holographic representation that was less a technological display and more a living, breathing map of collective psychological interactions. "Conflict," she began, her voice carrying the calm of a master strategist and the empathy of a therapist, "is a language that most civilizations speak without understanding its grammar." The hologram expanded, revealing intricate networks of cultural interactions that pulsed and shifted like living organisms. It wasn't just data. It was a living, breathing map of collective consciousness that made the most advanced alien scanning systems look like children's drawing tablets. Captain Elena Rodriguez watched from the sidelines, understanding that what Nakamura was about to do was far more powerful than any traditional diplomatic approach. This wasn't negotiation. This was collective psychological archaeology. Dr. Nakamura began to demonstrate how seemingly unrelated cultural practices were actually complex communication systems. A trade ritual of the Viren Concordance, which had been interpreted as a formal economic exchange, was revealed to be a deeply nuanced form of emotional communication that had been misunderstood for centuries. The Kelthari delegates, whose translucent bodies were notorious for their ability to display complex emotional states, found themselves simultaneously horrified and fascinated. Their entire understanding of interspecies communication was being dismantled with surgical precision. "You've been interpreting each other's actions," Dr. Nakamura continued, "through a lens so narrow that you've missed the fundamental connections between your civilizations." Dr. Marcus Chen joined her, his linguistic expertise complementing her psychological analysis. Together, they began to reveal how translation technologies had been fundamentally flawed. A word that meant cooperation in one culture had been consistently translated as submission in another, a mistranslation that had fueled centuries of unnecessary tension. The holographic display began to show potential collaborative scenarios, not as theoretical models, but as living, breathing possibilities. Civilizations that had been enemies for centuries suddenly appeared as potential symbiotic partners. Chief Diplomat Kral of the Velox Concordance found his neural links overwhelmed. The humans were performing a form of collective cultural surgery that cut deeper than any weapon could, exposing the hidden infections of misunderstanding without a trace of judgment. Dr. Elena Ramirez approached the Selenarian representatives, her technological expertise now focused on psychological patterns. Your conflict resolution mechanisms, she explained, are actually creating the very tensions you're trying to avoid. The hologram shifted, revealing how defensive strategies had been systematically creating the exact scenarios each civilization feared most. It was like watching a cosmic feedback loop of misunderstanding, where each defensive action only increased the potential for conflict. Captain Rodriguez understood the power of narrative. Each revelation was carefully measured, designed to challenge without completely destroying the delegate's sense of self. This wasn't about humiliation, this was about awakening. The most terrifying aspect was the complete lack of aggression in the human approach. They weren't attacking. They were explaining. They weren't condemning. They were revealing. Dr. Chen began to demonstrate how cultural communication patterns had created invisible barriers. A diplomatic gesture that was meant as a sign of respect in one civilization was consistently misinterpreted as a threat in another. Centuries of potential cooperation had been lost to these microscopic misunderstandings. The Rancor Crystalline Collective found their perfectly structured communication matrices beginning to vibrate with a new understanding. Their rigid cultural systems were being revealed as elaborate constructions built on misinterpretations. Conflict is a choice, Dr. Nakamura continued, her voice carrying the weight of generations of human psychological research. But it's a choice made in darkness without full understanding of the context. Captain Rodriguez stepped forward, her presence itself a form of communication. "We're not here to solve your problems," she said quietly. "We're here to help you understand that the problems themselves are an illusion." The diplomatic chamber had transformed from a potential battleground into a classroom of cosmic proportions. The humans were performing an intervention on a galactic scale, revealing the intricate psychological mechanisms that had kept these civilizations in a state of perpetual misunderstanding. Humanity hadn't just entered the galactic stage. They had rewritten the entire script of interspecies communication, and they were doing it with the casual ease of someone rearranging furniture. And they were just getting started. Dr. Elena Ramirez's tablet began to generate a holographic projection that defied conventional understanding of dimensional representation. It wasn't a standard three-dimensional model. It was something else entirely, a living, breathing map of reality that seemed to exist in multiple states simultaneously. "We've discovered something," she began, her voice carrying a tone that was equal parts academic precision and barely contained excitement, "that changes everything you understand about your existence." The hologram expanded, revealing layers of reality that should have been impossible. Quantum entanglement patterns that stretched beyond known dimensional constraints began to materialize around the diplomatic chamber. The assembled delegates found themselves witnessing something that challenged the very foundations of their scientific understanding. Captain Elena Rodriguez stood to the side, her presence a calculated counterpoint to the complex technological display. Where Ramirez's presentation was intricate and mind-bending, Rodriguez's stance was grounded, almost mundane. A deliberate contrast that only heightened the sense of something extraordinary happening. "The trans-dimensional threat," Dr. Ramirez continued, "isn't just an external force. It's a fundamental manipulation of reality itself." The holographic display began to show intricate patterns of intervention. It wasn't a straightforward invasion or conflict. It was something far more insidious, a systematic manipulation of civilizational development that had been occurring for millennia. Chief Diplomat Kroll's neural links began to overload. The information being presented wasn't just challenging their understanding, it was systematically dismantling their entire conceptual framework of reality. Dr. Marcus Chen approached the holographic display, his movements precise and calculated. "Your technological developments, your cultural conflicts, your entire evolutionary trajectory, they've all been subtly guided." The hologram began to show specific intervention points. A technological breakthrough here, a cultural conflict there, seemingly random events that, when viewed together, formed a pattern so complex and so deliberate that it bordered on the artistic. The Rancor crystalline collective found their perfectly structured communication matrices beginning to vibrate at frequencies that suggested pure existential terror. Their entire understanding of their civilization's history was being rewritten in real time. Dr. Aisha Nakamura began to overlay psychological analysis onto the dimensional intervention map. "It's not just technological manipulation," she explained. "It's a comprehensive psychological experiment on a galactic scale." The most terrifying aspect was the complete lack of malevolence in the presentation. The humans weren't accusing. They weren't condemning. They were explaining, with the same tone one might use to discuss a particularly interesting research paper. Captain Rodriguez understood the power of revelation. Each piece of information was carefully measured, designed to challenge without completely destroying the delegates' sense of self. This wasn't about creating panic. This was about awakening. The holographic display began to show potential intervention scenarios, not just the manipulations that had occurred, but the possibilities that had been systematically prevented. Entire potential technological and cultural developments that had been subtly nudged away from fruition. Dr. Ramirez's voice carried a clinical precision. "They've been using your civilizations as a complex system of research. Your conflicts, your technological developments, your cultural interactions, all of it has been carefully managed." The Kelthari delegates, whose translucent bodies were normally capable of displaying complex emotional states, found themselves in a state of complete cognitive paralysis. Their entire understanding of their civilization's autonomy was being systematically dismantled. Dr. Chen began to demonstrate specific intervention points. A technological breakthrough that was subtly redirected. A potential alliance that was carefully prevented. The level of precision was so intricate that it bordered on the artistic. "We're not just revealing a threat," Captain Rodriguez said quietly, her voice cutting through the complex holographic display. "We're offering you a choice." The diplomatic chamber had transformed from a potential battleground into something else entirely, a cosmic classroom where humanity was revealing the true nature of reality. The holographic display continued to pulse and shift, revealing layers of manipulation so complex that they defied traditional understanding. It wasn't just information. It was a complete reimagining of galactic existence. Humanity hadn't just entered the galactic stage. They had walked in, revealed the hidden strings of reality, and were now offering a way forward, all with the casual ease of someone solving a moderately interesting puzzle. And they were just getting started. The final transformation began not with a grand gesture, but with a simple question from Captain Elena Rodriguez. "What would you do," she asked, her voice carrying to every corner of the diplomatic chamber, "if you could truly write your own story?" The holographic displays that had been revealing the trans-dimensional manipulations began to shift. But this time, they weren't just showing past interventions. They were generating potential futures, living, breathing scenarios of collaborative potential that made the delegates' previous understanding of cooperation look like crude childhood drawings. Dr. Aisha Nakamura's tablet became a collaborative platform, transforming the diplomatic summit from a traditional negotiation into something entirely new. Each civilization found itself not just invited to participate, but actively engaged in a process of collective problem-solving that defied every existing diplomatic protocol. The Rancor crystalline collective, whose communication matrices had been completely recalibrated by the humans' previous revelations, found themselves generating technological solutions that would have been unimaginable hours earlier. Their perfectly structured quantum communication networks, once rigid and isolationist, now pulsed with a collaborative energy. Dr. Marcus Chen began facilitating a process that was less a diplomatic negotiation and more a collective reimagining of galactic potential. Translation wasn't just about converting words anymore. It was about translating entire cultural paradigms, finding connections where previous generations had only seen barriers. Chief Diplomat Kral of the Velox Concordance watched in growing amazement as the humans systematically dismantled every existing diplomatic framework, replacing it with something far more dynamic and alive. Dr. Elena Ramirez's technological displays began showing not just potential collaborative technologies, but entire ecosystems of innovation. A power grid developed by the Krelnoxian energy specialists could now be perfectly integrated with communication networks proposed by the Viren Concordance. Ecological management strategies from the Telnarian representatives found perfect complementary technologies in previously unrelated civilizations. Captain Rodriguez understood that true transformation wasn't about forcing change. It was about creating a space where change could naturally emerge. "We're not here to solve your problems," she explained, her voice carrying the weight of generations of human collaborative thinking. "We're here to help you see that the problems themselves are artificial constructs." The diplomatic chamber had transformed from a potential battleground into a living, breathing laboratory of collective potential. The humans weren't leading. They were facilitating. They weren't controlling. They were revealing. Dr. Chen began demonstrating how linguistic misunderstandings had been systematically preventing collaborative potential. A diplomatic gesture that meant respect in one civilization had been consistently misinterpreted as a threat in another. Centuries of potential cooperation had been lost to these microscopic misunderstandings. The Kelthari delegates, whose translucent bodies were normally capable of displaying complex emotional states, found themselves in a state of collective awakening. Their entire understanding of interspecies communication was being rewritten in real time. Dr. Nakamura's psychological analysis began showing how each civilization's defensive mechanisms had been systematically creating the very threats they were trying to avoid. It was like watching a cosmic feedback loop of misunderstanding being systematically dismantled. Technological displays began to show potential collaborative scenarios that were less about resource allocation and more about collective problem-solving. Civilizations that had been enemies for centuries suddenly appeared as potential symbiotic partners. Captain Rodriguez approached the central diplomatic platform, her presence itself a form of communication. "Conflict," she said quietly, "is a choice made in the absence of understanding." The humans weren't offering a solution. They were offering a perspective. Dr. Ramirez's final display was perhaps the most profound. It wasn't just a technological projection. It was a living map of potential, showing how each civilization's unique capabilities could create something far greater than any of them could achieve alone. Chief Diplomat Kroll found his neural links completely recalibrated. The humans had performed a form of collective cultural surgery that cut deeper than any weapon could, exposing the hidden potential of connection without a trace of judgment. The most terrifying aspect was the complete lack of aggression in the human approach. They weren't conquering. They were awakening. They weren't dominating. They were revealing. Humanity had entered the galactic stage not as conquerors, but as facilitators. Not as leaders, but as guides. They had rewritten the entire script of galactic interaction, and they were doing it with the casual ease of someone solving an interesting puzzle. And they were just getting started.